I will never forget that afternoon. In the middle of hundreds of cheers and thunderous applause, 6 seats in the front row sat painfully empty, reserved for my own family. No calls, no messages. Just those cold, vacant chairs, mocking me in the very moment that was supposed to be the happiest of my life. I had spent 6 long years, sacrificing everything, to earn my master's degree, only for them to choose a backyard barbecue over standing beside me. I didn't know it then, but their absence that day would ignite something deep inside me, fueling a plan for revenge so precise, so devastating, that they would never forget the day they underestimated me. My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 58 years old, a widow, and for as long as I can remember, I've been in survival mode. After my husband passed away far too young, I became both mother and father to our 2 children. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3 when the bills piled up, just to keep the lights on, food on the table, and a roof over our heads. But deep inside, I carried a dream that never left me. Before life's detours, I had always wanted to go back to school and earn my master's degree in psychology. For years, that dream sat quietly in the corner of my mind, waiting for a moment when I could breathe long enough to chase it. When my kids were grown and living their own lives, I decided it was finally my turn. But it wasn't easy. Every day was a juggling act. Mornings spent at my office job, evenings cleaning houses, and late nights bent over textbooks, writing essays, and studying for exams. I often sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out everywhere, while the washing machine hummed in the background. I was exhausted, but each completed assignment felt like a small victory, a step toward something I thought I'd never have. 6 years. 6 years of missed weekends, tight budgets, and pushing through bone-deep fatigue. And finally, I was there. Graduation. The day I had imagined countless times. I pictured walking across that stage, my children and grandchildren watching, their faces lit with pride. I believed it would be a moment we would all remember, a celebration of not just my achievement, but the sacrifices we had all made as a family. I wanted everything about that day to be perfect. I booked a reservation at one of the nicest restaurants in town for a post-ceremony dinner. I even splurged on something for myself, a new dress. It was the first one I had bought in over 20 years, a soft navy blue with delicate stitching at the waist. When I tried it on in front of the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. For the first time in decades, I felt beautiful. Most importantly, I reserved 6 seats in the very front row of the ceremony hall, right where they could see me clearly when I received my diploma. Those seats were meant for my children, their spouses, and my 2 precious grandchildren. I imagined their cheers, their applause, their voices calling my name. I imagined hugs and happy tears afterward. In my heart, I thought this would be our moment, a moment to show that even in the face of loss, hard work and perseverance could bring dreams back to life. I had no idea how wrong I was. The morning of my graduation, I woke up with butterflies in my stomach. I had ironed my new dress the night before, laid out my shoes, and double-checked the restaurant reservation. My diploma gown hung on the back of my bedroom door like a promise finally fulfilled. I was sipping my coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my son. "Sorry, Mom. We're busy today." I froze, reading the words over and over. Busy. On the day I had been telling them about for months. Before I could even process it, another message appeared, from my daughter. "We'll come by to visit afterward." But they never came. I told myself maybe they'd change their minds, maybe they'd surprise me and show up at the ceremony. But when I walked into the auditorium, the truth was undeniable. 6 seats in the very front row sat completely empty, their absence screaming louder than any applause could. When my name was called, I walked across the stage with a smile fixed to my face, but inside, it felt like someone had wrapped a cold hand around my heart and squeezed. I glanced toward those empty chairs, hoping, irrationally, that at the last second they'd appear. But the seats just sat there, mute and unyielding, like monuments to my loneliness. People clapped, cameras flashed, and I accepted my diploma, but the moment felt hollow. All those nights of studying until dawn, all the sacrifices, all the dreams, and the people I loved most couldn't be bothered to be there. After the ceremony, I stood outside, watching other graduates embrace their families. Parents held their children tightly, spouses handed over flowers, siblings shouted with joy. I stood alone, holding my diploma in one hand and my phone in the other, trying not to cry. When I finally made it home, I called the restaurant and canceled the reservation. The hostess sounded disappointed, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. I hung up, sat on the couch, and scrolled through our family group chat. It was full of photos, my children, their spouses, my grandchildren, all gathered in someone's backyard. They were smiling, holding plates of food, laughing beside a barbecue grill. A celebration, but not mine. That was the moment it hit me, sharp and bitter. I had become the person they only remembered when they needed something, a babysitter, a loan, a last-minute favor. But when I needed them, when it truly mattered, I was invisible. The 6 empty seats at my graduation weren't just a missed moment. They were a message, and I heard it loud and clear. I cried until my pillow was damp and my chest ached. It wasn't just sadness. It was the heavy, suffocating realization that I had been pouring my life, my time, and my money into people who couldn't even spare a few hours for me. But when morning came, something in me had changed. The grief settled into a cold, steady clarity. If I kept living the way I had been, nothing would ever change. They would keep taking, I would keep giving, and they would never respect me. So, I decided to stop. The first step was reclaiming my own power. I called my son and told him I couldn't send him money for his overdue car payments anymore. His shocked silence on the other end was almost satisfying. "I'm sorry," I said simply. "I have other priorities now." Then came my daughter. I told her I couldn't watch the kids for free every weekend. She protested, said she depended on me. I reminded her that I had depended on her once too, on a day she didn't show up. The silence that followed told me she understood exactly what I meant. 4 years, my life had revolved around their needs. Now it was going to revolve around mine. I pulled out my savings account statement, the money I had been tucking away for emergencies. Well, I decided this counted as one. I invested it into a dream I had buried long ago, opening a small community mental health project. I had always wanted to create a safe space where people could find counseling, support groups, and guidance without the crushing costs that kept so many away. The idea lit a fire in me. I spent weeks researching grants, recruiting volunteers, and securing a modest but welcoming space downtown. Every step of the process was like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost. But as fulfilling as that was, I wasn't finished. No, part of me still burned with the need for something more personal. Something that would make them understand what it feels like to be dismissed, to be unimportant in someone else's eyes. I wanted them to feel the same sting I had felt staring at those 6 empty chairs. I wanted them to question their choices, to see the consequences of their absence. This wasn't about screaming or fighting. It was about building something so undeniable, so powerful, that they would have no choice but to face the truth. And when the time came, I wouldn't chase them down. I would simply stand where they could see me, stronger, independent, and entirely out of their control, and let them realize they no longer had a place in my front row. I knew my 60th birthday was coming up. In my family, big birthdays were always an unspoken obligation. Someone would host, there would be food, laughter, and at least one awkward toast. And I knew exactly what they were expecting, that I would play hostess as always, footing the bill so they could come together as a family. I decided to give them that gathering, but with a very different purpose. The idea came to me one quiet evening while I was reviewing my notes for the community center. What if I turned the day they expected to celebrate me into the day they finally saw me? Not the mother or grandmother they took for granted, but the woman they had neglected, the woman who had been there for them over and over while they treated her as disposable. I booked a luxurious hotel conference room instead of my usual cozy living room. It had high ceilings, glittering chandeliers, and a massive projector screen. This wasn't going to be a birthday party, it was going to be a reckoning. I mailed out invitations, each one in an elegant envelope, addressed in my neat cursive handwriting. Inside, I wrote only one line beneath the date and location. Come. This will be the day everything changes. No balloons. No cake. No hint of what I was planning. Over the next month, I combed through my phone, my laptop, even old printed photographs. I collected everything: the cheerful "sorry, Mom, we can't make it" texts, the desperate "can you send me $500 just until Friday" messages, the family group chat pictures from events I hadn't been invited to. And then I found the most painful image of all: the 6 empty chairs at my graduation ceremony, neatly reserved with name cards, untouched from start to finish. I had asked the photographer to capture that moment at the time, thinking I'd use it as a reminder of resilience. Now it would serve a very different purpose. On the day of the party, they arrived in clusters, dressed for celebration. My son carried a gift bag. My daughter had her kids in tow. They were smiling, expecting champagne and a buffet. Instead, the lights dimmed. The first image appeared on the massive screen: my smiling face in a cap and gown, with the camera slowly panning to the 6 empty chairs. Then came the messages, the cancellations, the excuses, the requests for help. Slide after slide, moment after moment, the truth played out in sharp, undeniable detail. When the video ended, the room was silent. No one could look at me directly. My son shifted uncomfortably. My daughter's eyes were glossy, but she said nothing. That silence, that stunned, heavy quiet, was exactly the gift I had wanted. It was the sound of them finally seeing me. I rose slowly from my chair, my hands steady, my heart beating with a strange mixture of grief and liberation. For a moment, I simply looked at them, at the faces that had once been the center of my world. My son, jaw clenched but eyes darting away from mine. My daughter, arms folded tightly as if holding herself together. My grandchildren, confused, glancing between their parents and me. When I spoke, my voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of years. "I have spent my life showing up for you," I began. Birthdays, crises, scraped knees, broken hearts, unpaid bills, I was always there. I didn't ask for much in return. But when my turn came, when I needed you, 6 seats sat empty. I pointed toward the image still frozen on the projector screen, those 6 pristine chairs, perfectly aligned, untouched. It was more than a picture. It was the truth they had tried not to see. "You left them empty," I continued, my voice catching for only a second before I steadied it. "And in doing so, you left me empty." That day I realized something. Love without respect is just obligation. And obligation without love is just convenience. I let the silence settle for a beat before delivering the final blow. From this day forward, I will fill those chairs with people who truly value me: friends, colleagues, anyone who chooses to be in my life because they want to, not because they feel they have to. Those seats will never be reserved for those who see me only when I'm useful. A ripple went through the room. My son opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. My daughter's eyes welled up, though whether from shame or defensiveness, I couldn't tell. I didn't wait to find out. I picked up my purse, turned, and walked toward the door. My heels clicked sharply against the polished floor, the sound echoing in the heavy quiet. No one followed. No one tried to stop me. They just stood there, staring, stunned, watching me go. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. As I stepped out into the hallway, I breathed in deeply. The air felt lighter, cleaner, as though I had just shed a burden I had been carrying for decades. In that moment, I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother. I was a woman who had reclaimed her dignity. I didn't know exactly what the future would hold. But I knew one thing for certain: it would be mine. Every choice, every moment, every seat at my table, mine. And that, I realized with a faint smile, was the best birthday gift I could have ever given myself. In the weeks that followed, my life felt like a door swinging open to a world I had almost forgotten existed. For the first time in decades, my calendar wasn't dictated by someone else's needs. I booked a ticket to Italy, a place I had always dreamed of visiting but had never allowed myself to because there was always something more important. I wandered the cobblestone streets of Florence, sipped espresso in tiny cafes, and stood before the sunlit face of the Duomo, feeling smaller than the centuries-old stones and yet somehow more significant than ever. When I returned home, I didn't slip back into my old life. Instead, I joined a community group for independent women, widows, divorcees, and those who had simply chosen themselves after years of giving to others. We met for dinners, hikes, and late-night conversations over wine. With them, I didn't have to pretend. They saw me for who I was, not for what I could give. Meanwhile, the community therapy project I had invested in began to grow beyond my expectations. What had started as a modest local program turned into a network of support groups, counseling sessions, and workshops. People came not only for help, but for hope. Seeing lives change because of something I had built made me realize I hadn't just reclaimed my power, I had found a way to pass it on. 6 months later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, my son and daughter stood there together. Their posture was hesitant, almost fragile, like children facing the consequences of a broken vase. "Mom," my son began, his voice softer than I'd heard in years, "we came to say, we're sorry." My daughter's eyes glistened as she nodded. "Not just for that day. For everything. For taking you for granted. For making you feel like you didn't matter." The apology was real. I could feel it. And it would have been so easy to fall back into the role I had always played. The fixer, the forgiver, the mother who smoothed over every wound. But I didn't. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. Forgiveness, after all, was as much for me as for them. But then I added, "Things won't go back to the way they were. I'm not the same person anymore." They nodded, perhaps even relieved to hear it. They knew the rules had changed. And in that moment, I understood something important. Justice doesn't always mean making someone suffer the way you did. Sometimes, it's about showing them your worth so clearly that they can never again diminish it. I closed the door after they left, the house quiet but full of a different kind of warmth. I smiled to myself. This was my life now. Chosen, deliberate, and unapologetically mine. Remember this. No one has the right to make you feel invisible, not even the people you love most. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's simply placing yourself in the position you truly deserve. If this story touched you, share it so others remember. Our worth is defined by us, and us alone.